While anime like Genshiken, Lucky Star, Sayakano, Imo, and Haruhi are like fundamental in being the building blocks to establish like the type of otaku that I am now. Uh, there are two anime, one kind of good, one not so good, that are perhaps a little bit more influential and helped inform my current status as an otaku now, which I believe I've talked about in a couple places, but I've never like sat down, or I guess in this case stood up and told a story about either of them. So in this sort of uh, long form vlog, perhaps uh, narrative lecture, something like that, I'm just going to tell the story about myself, yourself, and Kita e Diamond Dust Drops, two anime that I watched during the summer of 2017 that basically set me down the path of being the specific type of otaku that I am now. Uh, and behind me, which looks extremely blue and I don't really expect to come out on camera correctly, is my television, or more accurately, my family's or my house's television that I just so happen to be standing in front of because I have the house to myself right now. So I'm watching anime on the big screen. Figured I might as well do a little vlog before I inevitably start a rewatch of Myself Yourself, which I haven't touched since the summer of 2017. So I wanted to bring things full circle, I suppose. So our story begins during the Nyaapocalypse of 2017. If you were there, then you remember the Nyaapocalypse, which was essentially the old Nyaa domain, which was Nyaa.si, was taken down for some sort of legal reasons. Nyaa nowadays lives as Nyaa.si, which is an anime torrent site. It's probably the best public tracker that I've ever used, and I still use it consistently despite being on a couple private trackers for anime. Nyaa basically has what I want 99.9% of the time. The only other private tracker I use is Baka BT, um, which I had been on for a long time prior to them becoming private. And a funny story about that. Let me go on a tangent. I'm gonna be here all night, so fuck it. Let's just talk. So Baka BT, I was on that before they became private because they used to be a sort of public tracker, but at the same time, like they would keep track of your ratio because you had an account. Um, but at the time, I was kind of like a dumb kid, and I would just like torrent stuff all willy nilly without much of a regard, and probably didn't even know what a ratio was. I was just leeching like everything until a certain point where they said my account was disabled. So I kind of abandoned Baka BT for a long time. After a while, I started to reseed things back because I realized that there was things on public trackers that I could uh, like seed back on Baka BT. For example, uh, the CBM or Cornbread Man's release of Monster, the television anime, Naoki Urasawa's Monster. And I think I had like a Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood torrent that I was seeding back. So I was like very slowly building up my ratio back on Baka BT over the course of a couple of years between like 2015, pretty much all of 2016 and 2017. I was like trying to rebuild the ratio. I didn't like get more serious about it until after the Apocalypse, in which like kind of a fire was lit under my ass that I was like, you know what, I should rectify my standing on Baka BT and rebuild my ratio more seriously, and that's kind of when I started to take adopt torrents. So I have a couple torrents I run over there. Um, Starting to upload a little bit more, not upload, but like reseed stuff more seriously. Like basically my entire torrent client right now is of Baka BT torrents alongside a couple other private trackers I'm on. Um, and then I reached a point where I was like, screw it, I just donated. It wasn't even a significant amount. I think they had like a holiday discount or something around Christmas time. I ended up donating like 20 or $30, and it basically fixed my entire ratio. So now I'm in excellent standing with them. I have like a 2.0 or higher ratio, so I'm in good standing. But that's a little side tangent about Baka BT, uh, which is not. I don't think it really comes into a. It really plays a huge part in this. But regardless, going back to the Nyaapocalypse, the reason the Nyaapocalypse was so significant is because Nyaa.se at the time was the anime public tracker. Pretty much everything was released there. So whenever a new episodes of a seasonal anime was released, it'd be there. Archives of older torrents would be there. It was basically your one-stop shop for everything anime because as opposed to other torrent sites like Pirate Bay, at the time, what was it, like Kick-Ass Torrents or something like that? A couple of those other public trackers that were a little bit more general didn't really have a good selection of anime, but Nya, in comparison, had like no ads. Stuff was always seeded. It was extremely organized, easy to find everything. It was fantastic. And when it went down, people were like, crap, now we got to turn to other things like Anime Tosho or whatever. And there was a couple other random things like Shana Project or something like that. But people started to scramble. I was one of those. Maybe I was an outlier because I had a significant amount of anime I liked to watch at a certain time. Like I watched a little bit more anime than the average person, so like when this happened, I was like, shit, dude, I'm kind of out of luck, and I took it a little more seriously than I probably should have, partially to LARP, as in like a data hoarder sense, and I think this sort of got me started on being a data hoarder, because after that I purchased a 2 terabyte hard drive, external hard drive I should say, and I started like being a little bit more meticulous about archiving the anime I would finish. Because prior to that, like I would just fill up my like a 500 gigabyte laptop hard drive and sort of watch with that, and then like delete stuff, re-download stuff, keep some of the good stuff around, but like generally keep like a steady stream of new items coming in. But the fact that Niao went down and I didn't have like a significant backup of stuff, I was like, crap, what am I gonna watch now? But luckily, stuff was handled. I mean, you could probably look back at old threads on A and stuff, for what actually happened and transpired during the Nyaapocalypse. But it was sort of a thing that was happening at this time. So that's kind of like the backdrop to this. The Nyaapocalypse is currently happening, and I was making a big deal about it. I found a couple other trackers during the time, but the story starts to I guess like to actually happen. Like we get to the actual beginning of the story, and we move away from the background. There's a show called Kita-e Diamond Dust Drops. I have the DVD right here. This was the first anime DVD box set that I ever bought. This is the ADV home video release. So Diamond Dust Drops is significant because I think it was at the time it was the Nyaapocalypse was happening, but I was also on summer vacation because that was the summer that I finished high school. So I was moving on to university, and I had like literally nothing but time during that summer. I was working part time, and just basically going to work, coming home, watching like a dozen episodes of anime, crashing, and then doing it all over again. And whenever I would get my paycheck, I would splurge like at least half of it on anime DVDs. And this was one of the first I bought. And the reason being was partially because of the time that I was now granted. Because in high school, I was kind of a busy boy. I was part of a certain club that I'm not going to really delve into because it's sort of inconsequential to the story. But the club took a significant amount of time away from me. But after finishing that and high school, I basically felt like my time during the day had like tripled or quadrupled. So I was just watching a lot of anime, and I was inevitably spending a lot of time on my anime list at .net, as well as like other database sites like AnyDB and stuff to find anime. I was starting to get into old net nostalgia stuff, and I was looking for like kind of interesting, kind of weird anime, and I stumbled across this one called Kita-e Diamond Dust Drops. I don't specifically remember how I found it. Maybe it was just like, like that Wikipedia game where you kind of like click on random links and see where it sends you. I kind of think that's how I found Diamond Dust Drops. But I know for sure I found it on my anime list, and what sort of piqued my curiosity with this specific show was how obscure it was. Because it was a show that had like maybe a handful, like maybe 1,000 something people who had watched it on Mal. And occasionally you see like really obscure shows having maybe like a couple 100,000, or not a couple 100,000, but maybe like 10,000 people. And you're like, well, that's not as obscure as I once thought it was. It's pretty cool when you find something with maybe like 100 something people or 1,000 people. This is one of those shows. And what was even more interesting was that this show was officially licensed at one point. So it was during this time, like I found the show and I was like just like looking for obscure stuff to download, I guess. Um, just messing around on private torrents, that private trackers, I should say, that kind of stuff. So with this show specifically, I wanted to find a download for it, but at the time the Nyaapocalypse was occurring, so I didn't really have access to Nyaa to download it, or even if I did have access to Nyaa, this show did not have any seeders, so I don't remember exactly what was happening. I think the Nyaapocalypse was going down. Um, so I hop on over to another thing I had heard about because uh, Diamond Dust Drops, or Kita Diamond Dust Drops, was a show that curiously was licensed in the early 2000s by ADV. And anime that are typically licensed during the 2000s and have a R1 DVD home video release, 9 times out of 10 they were have a torrent or a release by this group called Exiled Destiny, which were a somewhat notorious anime release group during the 2000s, early 2010s. They still exist now, but it was during this specific era when they were just ripping a lot of DVDs that were coming out. That was their golden era. I only say notorious because their quality is kind of varies. Their encodes are like extremely formulaic. Like basically every DVD, like it's going to be encoded the same way, which doesn't work for everything because it's not a one size fits all encode for whatever show you're watching. I'm pretty sure they still exist now. They still have an IRC channel, but I digress. The point is that I found that they did have a video release of this. It was either through AnyDB or the My Anime List fan sub feature, which the fan sub feature on My Anime List, which was infamously taken down. There's still scripts that can restore that stuff. I have a personal script. I don't know if there's one still floating around the internet, but if that's not the case, then I could share the one that I'm using. But anyways, I think it was through AnyDB that I found out that Exile Destiny did indeed do a release of this, and after doing a little bit of digging, I found out about this thing called XDCC. I'm just going to turn on the light so you can see stuff a little bit better, like what I'm actually holding. So XDCC is from, I'm not sure if it's the correct way to explain it, but it's sort of like an internet protocol, I guess, or it's sort of a way to download, not necessarily like an internet protocol, but it's like a feature within IRC that allows you to configure bots to download stuff off the internet. XDCC was something that will become extremely important in my otaku history, but I'll touch on that in a second. But this was just my first initial exposure to it. So I went over to this very site right here that's still up in all its 2000s web design glory. This is the Exile Destiny website, and they have a page called Bot List. Before, I think they used to have like an actual list. I think on the releases tab it still shows it, but they used to have like a huge list where you could like Control F and you could see what stuff was where. But regardless, I downloaded an IRC client. It was what is it? HexChat was the one. I downloaded that. I logged in. I managed to connect to the Exile Destiny IRC channel, and then from there, like I was kind of confused on what to do, so I looked around a little bit, and I saw the commands and stuff. So I'm like, okay, let me just message the bot, and then I sent the command. But I think I did something really dumb. Like I was pretty dumb at the time, and especially with some of this stuff, and I didn't really research too much. And the thing with IRC is that there's not a lot of like guides out there, especially now. But what I ended up doing was I just like sent an all command or something like that, like a normal like a normal message, not like an actual command. Like I forgot to put the slash at the beginning, and then everybody in the channel saw that, and I was just wondering why stuff wasn't downloading, and then there was a person in the channel who responded to what I had said, and he said something along the lines of, "Are you really going to download all the episodes one by one?" Which immediately made me realize that I had done two things wrong. One, I hadn't set the command right because everybody saw it, and two, that I didn't know how this worked. So I just panicked and closed hex chat, and then I didn't connect again. I inevitably went to eBay and found a copy of Diamond Dust Drops on DVD for myself, which was fairly inexpensive, all things considered. It was maybe like $15 shipped, because it's not a very popular show. And eventually I got around to watching it, and it was funny because once I got the DVD, I just didn't have much interest in continuing to watch the show, so I kind of put it on the back burner, and I ended up watching it like during 2020 or something. So it was just like hanging out on my shelf for a long time, despite having an initial interest towards the show for a while. Let me see what I have here. This is just a random XCC bot list or something. This is the Kitae Diamond Dust Drops NEDV list. But I guess where the story kind of like continues, like a lot of this stuff, like I don't remember the details specifically, but I think it was because of Kitae Diamond Dust Drops that turned me on to a certain like different style. Like it made me want to dig deeper and find some of those find some of the real shit, I guess, like the deeper cuts in terms of like the anime that was out there. Because for the longest time I would just kind of watch whatever was popular or whatever like I knew people were talking about, because during high school there was this dude who was one that kind of helped me get into anime. They would always like tell me a bunch of stuff about anime. Remember the story from Digibro with Dansan? He was kind of like the Dansan to me. So he was like this dude who seemingly had an infinite knowledge of anime, and was just kind of like telling me stuff. And I kind of just watched whatever he was talking about because I figured that was the good stuff. But then once I started to cultivate my own interests, especially after high school, and I kind of stopped talking to a lot of people, I started to see kind of what was out there, and especially with the more time that I was allotted by finishing school and being on summer vacation, and then eventually into university, where I ended up with like a ton of time because uni was a cakewalk for me. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but a lot of people exaggerate about uni difficulty. Maybe it was just my specific major that it was just a piece of cake. I think it's just that Ryaju like to, or think that socializing is like necessary, and they kind of get like lost in the weeds and the minutia of like being a social person and like doing other shit when you don't really need to do that. Like if you just become a hikikomori in university, you will just have a ton of time. But I digress. But anyways, the point is that I started to research and cultivate my own interests with anime. A lot of this was thanks to Digibro. Like I was watching some Digibro videos, especially after dark, and I was finding different shows that Digi was talking about that I had not heard of, or probably would not have heard of if it wasn't for their channel. I got into Gainax shows because of Digibro. I started to watch a little bit of other shows. I think it was because I watched NHK because some offhand comment or some PCP podcast episode or something like that. But I'm starting to explore more, and one of the first shows that I found was Kitae, and then I continued to look, and the next show I stumbled upon was Myself Yourself. This show is probably one of the most important anime I watched during 2017, and that's saying a lot because in that same year I also watched Gunbuster, NHK, Genshiken, Lucky Star, and probably a few others, but this one is easily up there. The reason being is that this was the first anime that I watched that I was acutely aware that it was a show based on a Bishoujo game. And for those who know, and like for those who actually know, like the real ones out there, and know that I'm obsessed with those types of adaptations. But to give further context is that in this day and age, like one of the things that I'm most interested in within the medium of anime and otaku culture in general is anime based on Bishoujo games, and to a certain extent Bishoujo games as a whole. But I find the adaptations of Bishoujo games into other mediums like manga and anime to be these curious things because uh, just taking them at face value, they are essentially advertisements for a game that was kind of niche to begin with. It's sort of like an anime adaptation of a JRPG or something, or not necessarily like a hack sign or something like that, but maybe like a little step below. Something that not many people would find interesting and are catered towards a very specific market. And the reason why I find a lot of these very fascinating is because of this niche appeal, but also because of like how small scale the productions tend to be and how cheaply they're made. And they're kind of like bad quality, I guess, but like I almost feel like a sense of obligation or like uh, almost like I pity them in that like no one will actually see these things happen. And for a lot of these shows though, I guess the bigger factor is that for a lot of these shows they don't have translated games to begin with, so it's like the only way I can sort of experience the source material is vicariously through the anime adaptation, I guess. But it's also kind of it just became my thing after a while, and myself yourself was kind of the progenitor of that idea, I guess. And do note, myself yourself was not the first anime based on a Bishoujo game that I had watched, but it was the first one to make me more aware of that due to how niche I perceived it to actually to not actually to be, but like how niche I perceived it to be, not necessarily how niche it actually was, because it's not a very niche show, but it's one that a lot of people probably are not as aware of compared to other Bishoujo game adaptations. Like, not even taking to it. Like, I'm not even gonna bother saying the key anime since they don't really strike me as Bishoujo games to begin with, considering how wide of an appeal they are, and especially since they have like PS2 versions, which are all ages. They're not really Bishoujo games at that point. They're more Nakige or like just general visual novels for people, similar to how like a Phoenix Wright game would be. But I digress. The point is, myself yourself was important. I found this one. This was the show that I found, and I downloaded it from Baka BT. There was a torrent up there of one of the fan subgroups, and because of the show, because of I went specifically to seek out the fan subs. I don't know if there is even an official release for it because it's kind of like an older show that is not really too popular. It wasn't released on Blu-ray ever, so maybe there are old DVD rips. But um, I intentionally went to look for the fan subs for it, and I intentionally found a group. Let's see if I could lower the screen here so I could look at the groups. All right, so there is a group right here called ShinGX. ShinGX, stylized as SHIN-GX, was the release I watched. It was a fan sub, which apparently is based on the DVD release of it. But, anyways, they are not the best release for this one, but they are like, it was kind of like an obscure thing. It was kind of like an interest, like watching it for historical context, I guess, to kind of like LARP to be in that moment. And this was sort of the genesis moment of me becoming interested in old random ass anime fan subgroups and acquiring and archiving anime fan subs, partially informed due to the Nyaapocalypse and seeing a lot of things sort of like disappear at the drop of a hat, or at the whims of laws that I had no control over in a country I lived nowhere near. I became more interested in archiving, especially like obscure releases or releases that are not as good, because especially nowadays there's a lot of release groups on Nya, and that's sort of what I guess is the primary things that are being uploaded onto the site, besides like seasonal stuff, which whatever. But release groups are essentially groups that take existing fan subscripts or like retail subs and they edit them, or they retime them, they restyle them, they add karaoke, they fix the signs and typesetting and stuff like that, and then they take maybe a pre-existing Blu-ray release, or they do their own encode or DVD release, and then they re-release everything as like a definitive edition. Essentially, it's the definitive edition or like Game of the Year edition for like a specific video game or something like that, or the deluxe edition of a record when it's released after a certain while. It comes with the bonus tracks and everything, or it's a remastered, blah blah blah. So you see a lot of release groups these days. That's the same goes for anime. A lot of times when you look for a specific anime, you're going to find the release group at the top. For example, I know for a fact if you look at Lucky Star on Nya and you're not grabbing a garbage like a re-encode group or re-release group, the number one release is probably going to be one by this person called Moe, or like someone who uses the tag Moe, which they took the base subs, I believe it was from the group AFK, and then they grabbed a Blu-ray release, and then they sort of like combined everything together to give Lucky Star a definitive edition. And the subs are pure Kino, by the way, but they do a lot of these release groups, and to actually acquire the original script is what I find more interesting. Like to find the old AFK release, the old AVIs, the old like 4x3, like the comfy, like looking at it, having the original files, like all the artifacting and the crappy like DivX or whatever, like encoding, artifacting, and like the chunk, man, the chunk. It's like how people, I guess like the best way I could describe it is how a lot of people find older graphics from video games, specifically from the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era, to be fairly comfy, despite the low fidelity and low polygon count. That's kind of how I describe my interest in this specific era of fan subbing. Though I guess the more accurate way to describe it would be like the early PS360 era, where the graphics, like they tried really hard to be 3D, high definition, and what have you, with a lot of like early Unreal 3 technology and stuff like that. I'm talking like bullet witch right now is what I'm saying. Like you look at like the shiny floors and stuff, and like the super wide open areas that, like, you know the game doesn't look that good, but it's sure trying pretty hard to do that. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, because like it's easy for you to be like, oh, Super Nintendo, that 32-bit pixel perfection of like Final Fantasy VI or like Chrono Trigger or something like that. Like anyone could find that appealing. It's still appealing now, for a reason, because pixel art is timeless. That's why a lot of indie devs leverage that particular style. But you don't really see people specifically going for that PS2 or like early PS360 type of graphics, because it's kind of rough around the edges, and a lot of those games have seen definitive editions released later on, or like on PC or something, but like the original versions have a sort of like niche appeal to them in their low frame rates and poor performance and like rough around the edges graphics. That's why I like fan subs. I know the translations are not always good, but they have a sense of character that a lot of retail anime does not have. Especially like a lot of the times I would rather read a bad translation, because I kind of know what's happening anyways. Like I can hear the characters, I understand anime level Japanese vocabulary to a certain degree, that the subs are almost inconsequential. Like I still need them to a certain extent as like my training wheels, but I don't solely rely on them, and I could tell a good translation from a bad translation, but sometimes I would rather see a goofy translation than not. That's why, for example, like certain releases by Kami, for example, I find really interesting, or another group like GG. There's like a little side story, a little side tangent, but the GG release of Baka to Test is freaking phenomenal. For one, they have like jokes in the metadata of the show, like when you're hovering, at least in NPC HC, when you like mouse over the like the chapters, like each each chapter is titled something ridiculous by whoever was doing the like the making the chapters and everything for the specific release of the show. But the subs are just like kind of off the walls. It's fantastic. Like, it elevates a funny show to being even funnier because the fan subs are funnier. And then watching a release by the aforementioned group Kami of an anime that is not really that good can give it a sense of character and make the enjoyment of the show more appealing, I guess, after the fact, or at least like make it more bearable, I guess. Like, there are certain shows that I see that Kami subbed it, and I'm like, that's probably a really bad Shaft anime from like 2011. Let me grab the Kami release of it so I can get a little bit of enjoyment from it. Like, Kami has their haters, they have their fanboys. I'm kind of indifferent about them. They do, when Kami is serious, then they're serious. When they're goofy, then they're kind of all over the place. Like, and it's fun in its own way, kind of like the Sword Art Online 2 OP that they did. But I specifically went for the Shinji X release of Myself Yourself. I believe I acquired this on Baka BT because at the time I still didn't know how to torrent, I still didn't know how to download stuff off XDCC. So I ended up watching this show during 2017, and I had a blast. It was largely informed by the perceived obscurity of the show, as well as like the general aesthetic the show gave off. It was kind of like this melancholic, melodramatic, kind of slow paced, but kind of like comfy anime that took place in like the Inaka of Japan, like the countryside. Like, not a huge town, but not like the straight up countryside, like Nanan Biori or something like that. And it had appealing pretty girl, Bishoujo girl, that makes no sense. Because that's like saying pretty girl. They had interesting Bishoujo characters. The show, I don't really remember what it was about, not too much. That's why I'm going to give it a rewatch. But at the time, like, I was into it a lot for the aesthetic and like the general like feeling the show had and the type of emotions that it presented. It was very raw, and I enjoyed it a lot. Later that year in 2017, I got myself a DVD copy of this show, Myself Yourself, because it was by Made in Japan. Made in Japan does some like pretty crappy releases, to be honest. Like, I have their Two Heart 2 release, and they have like a handful of typos in the like a retail DVD release, just to show how much they care about the show. But I got this from Sentai Filmworks. Sentai Filmworks no longer sells DVDs, so you can't really get this anymore, unfortunately. I talked about that a number of times, so I'm not going to delve into another Sentai Filmworks rant. But there's that right here. It's not going to stand up. But I enjoyed Myself Yourself, and I'm like, I like this show. I want more of it. Let's see if I can go up. I think I just messed up the colors on my keyboard, because before it was like glowing, but now it's not. So there's this thread. I talked about it in my blog, like remembering Kita e Damindra Drops, I think is what I called the blog. But I'm sort of expanding on the story from there into its like own thing. But the thread on Anime Suki is called mid to late 2000s / 20, or let me re-say that. Mid late 2010 2000s to 2010 seinen romance / drama anime, which I will link in the description down below so you can take a look at it. Now, Anime Suki is a wonderful archive for like old otaku culture. So if you have like time, just like go on Anime Suki and look at old threads and kind of see the goofy stuff that people were talking about, and like the old opinions people used to have. There's also like a desktop thread on Anime Suki where people would post screenshots of their desktop, which is an absolute gold mine if you're obsessed with looking at desktops of other people, especially like otaku desktops and stuff. Unfortunately, you'll see a lot of like old photo bucket errors and stuff like that, like because old hosts no longer exist. Some people deleted those accounts, stuff like that. But you'll reach a point where like stuff will catch up and you'll actually see desktops from like 2009 and stuff like that. But anyways, Anime Suki loving aside, there's this thread made by a user called Pocari Sweat, and it was basically, I'll read the thread. He says, or they say, I can't exactly think of a correct title, but to describe in words, there was a period of time in anime somewhere around the mid to late 2000s to 2010s where there was a genre of anime I got attached to, which was romance drama based anime that was seinen in demography, demography, and was was of a certain style which I'm having trouble describing. It's very different from the style of romance drama that today's anime seems to portray this genre in shows like Nagi no Asukara, Toradora, Sakura So, Ano Natsu de Matteru, or Golden Time, which I unfortunately despise. I'm talking shows like A Tale of Memories, True Tears, Kimi ga Nozomu Eien, Myself Yourself, Sola H2O, etc. Been digging through my anime collection today, and I realized these kind of shows have historically not sold well on disc and are rare to be made into television anime. The only ones I can remember off the top of my head of the style in recent times are White Album 2 and Kimi no Irumachi. I have an attachment to these kind of series, even if they are not very good or have problems that have problems and been feeling a strong sense of nostalgia for them. But that's probably why I was ecstatic as hell when White Album 2 was as good as it was, because anime of that caliber in this genre and style comes once in a blue moon. I still stand by comment back then. I think it was the best romance drama anime since F/True Tears. So he goes on to talk about how this specific style of anime was appealing during this point of his life when he was feeling very lonely. And then they link a video, which I think the link is dead. And then there goes the thread. There's a couple of good, a pretty decent discussion happening here. But basically everything that this person said in the, I guess like their thesis or like their call to arms, is stuff that I was like looking at and I just like related to heavily. Now more than ever, now that I'm reading it and I haven't read this thread in a long time, like I just look at these shows. I've seen every single one of those shows, and a lot of them I consider to be favorites. I absolutely adore A Tale of Memories. It was the I believe 300th anime I ever watched. I basically watched well, I was going to say I basically watched all these shows in 1 year, but that'd be a lie. I watched A Tale of Memories, True Tears, Myself Yourself during my first year of uni, and then I watched the rest during the time towards the end of when I was graduating and stuff like that. But a lot of these shows are shows that I absolutely enjoy, and I was just like looking at them and I'm like, yeah, I totally get where they're coming from. Like, of course, like you watch these types of shows and there's a certain attachment that I have similar to this person. Might not be exactly the same, but I relate to that shows that have not sold well historically, that are not very good and have a lot of problems, but like I watch them, and when I watched Myself Yourself, I felt nostalgic for a time and a place and like a culture I never was able to experience, or probably will never be able to experience, of being an otaku during this time and being a fan of these types of shows and actually seeing them, come into fruition in having television adaptations of. Like, especially nowadays, you're never going to see an anime based on a Bishoujo game because that's not really what's in vogue anymore. But back then, I guess even watching or having a show that is based on an anime or a visual novel like Myself Yourself is kind of rare. But it was because of this thread that I was inspired to look for more of these shows. Another one that's a favorite of mine is Kimi ga Nozomu Eien ni Kimi Nozu, which I watched I think in like 2019, and like when I watched it, I was just like, holy shit, dude, I'm watching something amazing. It's like, as soon as I was watching it, I knew I probably had a new favorite on my hands. But like, these shows are really special to me, and it was because of Myself Yourself. This show right here, it sort of got me, like, it got the ball rolling in terms of like me sort of discovering the type of anime that I'm interested in, this very specific flavor. Like, I found my niche, and I was able to point to this one specific show for that. that yes, of course, there are shows like Imo, Saikano, Lucky Star, Haruhi, NHK, Origairu that like I objectively enjoy better, but it's because of these like deeply flawed but somewhat interesting obscure anime that helped me cultivate my own interests and find an entire style of anime that like is kind of unusual, but like something that can only be found in anime. Like when people ask me, well, I mean, no one really asks me why, um, but if hypothetically someone were to ask me why do I like anime so much, why am I so attached to this specific style uh, of entertainment, it's because of shows like Myself Yourself or Kitae Diamond Dust Drops, which are not very good, but they're fascinating pieces of work. Like I look at it and I'm like, how does this exist? Like I look at like Affatale Memories and it's such a unique like artsy take on this Bishoujo game style. It has like so much melodrama and like excellent character writing and like interesting shot composition. And like the music is phenomenal. Like Tenman goes hard with that. Like both openings from the show Affatale Memories and Affatale Melodies by Elisa are fantastic. Like Elisa is one of my favorite J-pop singers because of Affatale Memories. Like this show only exists within anime. Like literally nowhere else could it be a thing. So this thread right here is why I love anime. It's like finding your niche, and this just happens to be my niche. Um, so like this is what I watched when I went into before going into my first year of uni, alongside other stuff like Genshiken, which informed kind of how I wanted informed me of the stuff that was out there and helped cultivate my own taste as an otaku, and consequently in the time since I have gone on to watch a number of these anime based on Bishoujo games. And on AnimeDB, there's a list like you could sort by the tag erotic game, and then limit it to exclude 18 plus animation, because obviously there are like legitimate hentai based on Bishoujo games and like actual like adult edo games, stuff like that. But I'm specifically interested in those, not so much like the actual 18 plus stuff, but like stuff that was like toned down and released it as a television show. Stuff like Da Capo, Kimi ga Nozumu A&E, Myself Yourself, Sola, H2O, all those good shows. Like I could think of like a half dozen more, but and that's kind of the point. Like these are what I find interesting. And when I went to uni, I'll just like finish up with the last part, I guess, is our university internet blocked P2P, peer-to-peer stuff, which was including torrenting. So I wasn't able to torrent anime at uni. So for a while, I was kind of like in panic mode, I guess. Like I didn't really know how to acquire anime, because for pretty much like the majority of my time as an otaku up until that point, it was torrenting stuff. Like for a brief while, I was streaming, but once I found out about torrenting, like I just became a torrent boy. And at the time, I was like deeply invested in torrenting, and I didn't really like going back to watching streaming, which I did for a little bit. But one of my favorite things about watching anime that I have saved locally is taking screenshots of the show, like interesting, like backgrounds, cool character moments, cute anime girls, funny lines that they might have mistranslated, or like translation notes of like a little random tidbit of Japanese culture that I probably will never need to know, but I just take a screenshot of it anyways. I click the S key in MPV. Like on my other laptop, my HP laptop, which was the first computer I ever had and the one that I watched a lot of anime on, like the S key on that is like it's visibly worn down because of how many screenshots I've taken on that show on that laptop. Granted, the keyboard wasn't that good compared to like my ThinkPad, which I probably watched more anime on, but it's significantly more durable. Another discretion, suimasen. But regardless, where was I? Crap. Taking screenshots, downloaded anime. I had to figure out how to download anime somehow. I found like a couple of random like kind of sketchy download sites, but I'm like there's got to be a better way. Of course, besides using a sketchy download site or like buying a VPN, which I didn't have money for, the savings I did have, and whenever my parents would send me money, they would be like, "Hey, Pars, do you need like $20 or something for food?" Or whenever they would visit me to like drop off clothes or like pick up like clothes for that was out of season. So like at the beginning of the fall, they picked up all my shorts and stuff, and then I got like pants and my jacket and stuff. I'm like, "Hey, Pars, you need any money for like food or anything?" I'm like, "No, I don't go out. I don't eat anywhere." Uh, you know. And then like they were just like, "You know what? Here, just take $20 just to have pocket money." So I would just like stash this money, and then whenever like I would come home, I would hit up my local bookstore, used bookstores, regular bookstores, local video game shops, and then buy physical media, and that's how I got a lot of my anime collection, essentially through uh, not spending my lunch money, but uh, it was because of like, during this uni time that I needed to find a way to download my anime, because I still needed it, dude. Because like streaming, one of the biggest problems I have with streaming, not even considering officially, but like just watching on a random like pirate torrent site or something, not torrent site, but like uh, at the time it was like 9 anime or something like that. For a while there was one called Zoro.tv that I used it briefly like a couple months ago when it no longer exists. But all these pop up and they go away, which is kind of annoying. But the biggest annoyance I have with a lot of these sites is that I don't know who subbed it, and I don't know if I'm watching like official subs or I'm watching a fan sub. When you download your own anime, you have a lot of freedom to pick whichever subgroup that you watch. Whereas if you look up on this torrent, not torrent, but like a streaming site, you might be subjected to terrible subs or something, and that's like the only option you got. Eventually, I found out how to use XDCC, and I found out that because of the protocol, it just uses like standard downloading protocol and not like peer to peer, just like HTTP downloads or something like that. I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, but it doesn't use a special protocol and it gets around peer to peer stuff. So I was able to download anime off IRC using XDCC commands. After a while of trial and error, and like no longer being ashamed of it, and like kind of figuring stuff out, like I looked up more extensively how to actually download this stuff. And there was another site called Nibble, like NIBL or something like that. I don't know, if you know, you know. But this site still exists, by the way, and I still download anime regularly off XDCC. But there was an anime site called or like this XDCC like query site where you could like search up an anime, and it gives you a list, and you like click on the show, and or like click on the line item, and it gives you the command that you could just essentially copy and paste into your IRC client. So once I figured that out, then I got like a comfy setup. Like I would just download new anime directly into my anime folder, and my uni had fiber internet, and I was like wired up. I'm just like laughing remembering this shit, dude. This was so nostalgic, because my uni, we had wired internet, and I was probably like the only fucking dude in the dorms who had their internet wired up to their computer. But like I had my like Cat 6 cable plugged into the side of my ThinkPad, and I was just like like XDCC downloading anime at lightning speed. Like I just found a bunch of random ass old fan subs and shit on there, and I would just like spend a ton of time just finding these random ass XDC bot list sites, which no longer exist for the most part. I had like a bunch of like channels saved and stuff, and I was like building a collection, and then my laptop hard drive got filled, and I was like, damn. And then eventually I got my 2 terabyte hard drive, like I said. But like I was just downloading this stuff like lightning fast, because we had like super fast internet, and then I was all wired up, so I was getting like gigabit internet, and it was insane, dude. Like probably my laptop hard drive at the time couldn't keep up with it, but eventually I got a solid state upgrade. But that's how I was rolling, dude. I was just like downloading anime like constantly. This laptop, my ThinkPad that's below me that I can't show you right now because it's plugged into the TV. It was just it was a workhorse, man. I just watched so much anime on this thing. Like before, when I went to entered uni, I had seen like less than 200 anime, and then by the time I finished my first year of uni, which was only a couple months later, maybe like 8 or 9 months later, I had watched over 300 shows. So like during the course of a couple months, I had watched a lot. Like I think I watched my 200th anime like one in my first month, and then I hit number 300 uh, with F A Tale of Memories. My 200th was Lucky Star. 300 was F A Tale of Memories. F A Tale of Memories I watched towards the end of May, 2018. And I just remember it, dude, because I was just like watching F A Tale of Memories like on just like a regular ass like Monday or what Thursday or something like that. And like one of my classes got canceled, and it was kind of cloudy outside. It was like drizzling, and I was just like watching an episode and then like clicking the page. I think it's like page up, because like MPC will like cycle through your like your files and stuff, and you just like keep watching shit. And I was just like watching episode after episode. I'm like, dude, this show is good, and I just keep watching, and I just have time. I look at the clock, and I'm like, I still have time, dude. It's not even that late. Go get food, get back to my dorm room, just watch more anime. Had like this little light, like this little desk light that just like stayed on, and I'm just like chowing down on whatever like I brought back, like some tendies or something from the dining center I got. Just like continuing to watch anime. Those were the days, dude. Those were the days. I gotta make a video, just like rambling about my like my favorite otaku memories. I guess that was one of them. That was F Tale of Memories. My Tale of Memories. This is Tale of Memories, dude. It all is. But myself, yourself. This is the real stuff. I'm gonna give it a rewatch. I have the fan sub loaded onto my computer. It's not the original fan sub group that I watched, which was once again Shin-GX, who didn't necessarily do a good job, and plus their fonts were kind of bad. But I have the M33W release for Mew, and I forgot who else did it, but there was a different release that I found of it that I'm going to give a watch, and I believe it's a DVD and code. But I'm going to give it a rewatch. My first time revisiting the show since 2017. If I have anything significant to add to the conversation, if there even is a conversation surrounding myself yourself, it will be posted in the form of a blog on the text blog, which I have failed to post anything at all. But anyways, that is my story relating to Kita E Diamond Dust Drops, as well as myself yourself, IRC channels, the Nyaapocalypse, anime torrenting, going to uni, and everything in between, and as well as like the genesis point of me becoming interested in anime based on shoujo games. I might have to retell this story once again when I inevitably make a video about why I'm watching every single anime based on a Bishoujo game. But this, I guess, is the long form, unscripted vlog, PCP lecture type thing, because I got a TV behind me. Hope you enjoyed. Hope it made sense, and I hope I articulated everything correctly, because I haven't done one of these in a long time, and I certainly haven't talked this long in a long time.